Once you get over the initial shock and thinking how bizarre the decision is, what it kind of did for me though was shine a light on how interchangeable the two main parties really are just now.
To some extent, I think the Conservatives ones were quite jubilant in a way, because I don't think she's necessarily been the easiest colleague at times for them to work with. I think the Labour ones were, what on earth have you passed over?
There is strong talk that there is more than one in the behind the curtains, ready to emerge.
Hello and welcome to the Political Forecast. This week, if things weren't bad enough for Rishi Sunak, a damaging defection has now followed a disastrous election. One of the Conservatives' most right-wing MPs has jumped ship to Labour. But could Keir Starmer have misjudged this one, given the less than enthusiastic welcome from his own backbenchers? We'll explore the very strange things that can happen when you fall out with your own party with someone who had her own painful breakup, the former Conservative Education Secretary Justine Greening, and the SNP's Mhairi Black, who last year accused Scotland's brand new Deputy First Minister, Kate Forbes, of alienating swathes of the population, including, presumably, herself. Is couple counselling on the cards there or not? And Channel 4 News' political editor Gary Gibbon, who can tell us more about the voters doing their own bit of defecting. Welcome to you all. Wonderful to see you back here. Okay, Gary, let's start with you. Natalie Elphicke, not an obvious candidate for defection, especially not to the Labour Party. Yeah, what on earth happened?
A lot of people had her down as a possible defection to Reform Party. One Tory MP said to me yesterday, I have seen her defecting to the AFD rather than the Labour Party. It's as if John McDonnell leapfrogged over centre and right-wing Labour MPs and gone to the Tory Party. It's extremely unlikely. It wasn't seen as possible. I'm told she turned up already, as it were, minted as a defector. Sometimes there are processes, and I can remember one defector, Sean Woodward, back in the Tony Blair era, coming over from the Tories. I think he saw Tony Blair 2-3 times beforehand. There were caresses, there were offers.
Minted on the phone beforehand? I mean, it was all...
She turned up having made her decision, as I understand it. And many people are still scratching their heads about why. And could there be a sting in the tail? Also, some Tory MPs were also saying yesterday to me that maybe the rebels who were trying to bring down Rishi Sunak had forgotten they'd called off the coup, and she was part of that to destabilise him. But general bafflement and real anger on the Labour benches. I remember when previous defections have happened, not least Christian Wakeford, who came over from the Tories and is now going to run for Labour in his seat. When he went across the floor, they don't actually cross the floor, they just come in on the other side and sit behind the leader prominently. There was order paper waving and cheering from Labour MPs, a bit of queasiness on some parts there, but this nonetheless...
This time around, just disbelief, right?
Disbelief and some horror.
And Mhairi, was that your reaction, like, what on earth is going on here? Or...
Yeah, once you get over the initial shock and thinking how bizarre the decision is, what it kind of did for me though was shine a light on how interchangeable the two main parties really are just now, and that you've got someone who's so right-wing.
Oh, that'll be music to some people's ears and not others.
Exactly, comfortably going over to Labour. So to me, it signals quite a sorry state for British politics, I think, because it's good to have different parties and different views that you can go to, but when you're able just to sort of swither between the two, I think that's not a place you want to be.
Justine, is this just performative politics? I mean, Natalie Elphicke enjoying the limelight for another few months, and Keir Starmer thinking, let's be a bit greedy with this?
I just, honestly, Matt, I think most of us would say nothing surprises us that happens at Westminster, but this was one of those rare things that genuinely... I mean, everybody was hugely surprised. I spoke to Conservative and Labour MPs last night, and to some extent, I think the Conservatives ones were quite jubilant in a way, because I don't think she's necessarily been the easiest colleague at times for them to work with. I think the Labour ones were, what on earth have you passed over? And, we were joking, who's coming next? Bill Cash? Literally, as you said, it was the direction of the defection that was really shocking to people. And I think you're right. I think for anyone who's outside of that Westminster bubble looking at it, they must just think, no idea how any of this works anymore.
Yep.
Well, I don't know. Maybe they think that yet again Rishi Sunak's on at the level at which a lot of people engage with politics, which is not as obsessive as us. I think that Keir Starmer's calculating there will be a sense that his is the new party of the centre and that sort of thing, and there's someone with a small boats affected community who's come over to him. So another little poke at the one of the big issues which Rishi Sunak intends to fight the general election.
I think that's absolutely right. And so I think after you've got over almost the shock and the surprise and the sort of reaction of Labour, probably what's left is another MP has switched across to Keir Starmer away from Rishi Sunak, so it's damaging for Rishi Sunak.
But is that a shrewd calculation? Because, I mean, his own, there are many people in his own party, as you said, Gary, who are really unhappy about this. There's Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott still, is still in the wings, still waiting to be, let back into the club. And Natalie Elphicke, is welcomed with open arms, sits next to Keir Starmer. And the optics are really bad for many parts of the party.
I can understand Starmer's strategy being, look, if we can welcome someone like this into the Labour Party, then that signals to voters who might share some of these opinions, you can also vote with us. But then it comes down to principle, a lot of it. And what I struggle with Keir Starmer is there's no political core to him. When you compare the pledges and promises that he was making during his own leadership campaign, he has done the exact opposite of all the things.
But does that matter? Because that's the accusation levelled against him over and over again from the left of his own party. And he might say, that may be the case, but you know what? I want to win this election.
Well, that's where I think there's definitely a balance to be struck. And if he's not careful, he might push his own side too far. And the Labour Party's, and any political party, isn't going to succeed if the people who deliver the leaflets and knock on the doors are feeling disenfranchised.
So is he being sloppy because he's got such an incredible majority in the polls and also, in the local elections, that he thinks he can afford to take that risk?
Yes, I think so. I would say so.
I wonder if it's sloppy or just a little bit lacking in political nous. One of the things about these defection processes is that they're run by a very, very small, tight circle of people. They don't let the secret go out. Rachel Reeves didn't know until Natalie Elphicke turned up behind her, more or less, that there was a new member of the party in Parliament. And that really tight circle means that the number of people there with a lot of experience more broadly of politics, Keir Starmer's not been around for a long time. Let's say Sue Gray was involved. I don't know, but I'm guessing. Again, not hugely political. Don't have the antennae, but also, another point, don't do the due diligence, because Labour puts new candidates through an awful lot of scrutiny. Some of it they feel unfair, and whereas Natalie Elphicke turns up, and about 5 people decide whether that's a good idea or not, and she.
And how does it work? I mean, so and I know none of you are defectors, as it were, but how would you do it? Who would you call up if you wanted to defect? Who would you ring up?
I imagine your first port of call would be to your own party to be saying.
Well, wouldn't you want to know where you're going to be ending up?
I think people who defect feel themselves that they've been pushed to it, and that feeling comes from either not getting their own way or not getting the change that they desired from their own party and their own leadership. So that's why I'm saying my first port of call would be, right, let's see if we can find solutions to this stuff. And if you get to the point where you can't find a solution, then I imagine.
And of course, the SNP's had quite a few defections itself.
We've had a.
And
3.
Did you get any 3? I think in total. Did you get wind of that before it happened, or were you totally surprised and blindsided?
I think no one was surprised.
Right. No one was surprised.
No one was surprised.
Did you think there would have been more?
Yes, there was certainly
others in the
prominent rumours that there was quite a few thinking of it who at the last minute chose not to.
And they're still with you.
Yes.
And you look at them a little differently.
I look at them the same.
Justine, you are. I mean, you left the party, or the party left you. What happened? What happened between you and the Conservatives?
So, I mean, I guess the party just headed off down a direction I didn't want to follow.
And did you ever think of defecting to Labour before that happened?
No, because for me, my decisions, in a sense, were driven by what I'm really passionate about, which is social mobility. And
you weren't socially mobile across the aisle.
Well, I'd got involved in politics because I thought that was a vehicle to drive change. And I felt as I got towards the end of that 2019 Parliament that it was just obsessing, obviously, over Brexit. There were lots of other things it was going to be doing. And I really wanted to put my time into social mobility. So I had to ask myself a really tough question, which is, although I'd spent a lifetime, being in Parliament, I'd worked really hard to get elected. Actually, I realised if I wanted to, if you like, follow my mission of delivering social mobility, I was going to have to step outside of Parliament and work cross-party to do that.
But hang on, because, it was obvious to many people that you were falling out of love with the Tory party and it was perhaps falling out of love with you. Were you approached by other parties? Did you get solicitous calls from Labour or the Lib Dems saying, come to us, Justine?
No, and I think it's probably because the debate there wasn't really about almost my politics. I think you had this unique issue that almost, it was like literally putting unleaded petrol in a diesel car, Brexit. It just ran, it ran across party politics. And so none of the usual teams, in a sense, worked, and it caused huge amounts of
divisions.
Exposed divisions and all of that. So I think you almost had this big ticket issue that Parliament was trying to work on, whilst at the same time, for me, it was when I was really getting on with my social mobility work, and I'd actually left Theresa May's government to focus on it because she'd wanted to move me in a different department. I wanted to stay working on social mobility. So whilst all of this other stuff was happening in the background, I'm getting on with what I really care about the most. And I just steadily reached a conclusion that if I wanted to succeed in that, I was going to have to do it outside of Parliament. And I just thought, maybe that's a surprising conclusion, but
and talking of outside of Parliament, apparently Change UK did try and woo you, is that right?
Well, obviously many of the people that were in favour of a second referendum ended up leaving to set up Change UK, and obviously they told me they were going to be doing that. But I was in a position where I thought it's the parties that are the problem. That's the problem.
Why wouldn't a new party help?
Because it was political parties, in a sense, that were getting in the way of sensible decision making.
How do you do politics without them?
Well, this is the big question, isn't it, Gary? We've got a country that badly needs, in my view, social mobility, that has people on all sides of the political spectrum that care about it, and yet you end up literally arguing about semantics like what should it be called? Levelling up, breaking down barriers, social mobility, social justice. And politics has become too much about division and not enough about finding that common ground where people care about the same stuff, want to achieve the same things, and should be able to work cross-party. And, my conclusion is you need a much broader rewiring of maybe the political parties, but certainly Parliament.
Does that mean broader membership,
Absolutely.
or what could change? Because given that the parties probably are part of the landscape forever, for the foreseeable, do you want more people coming in and being members of the parties to broaden the intake? What would help?
I think parties have to be broad churches, and I think
But isn't that the problem, that they're too broad?
I think the mistake the Conservative Party made was to stop being a broad church, to head down a political cul-de-sac, and in a sense not be open to those other views within, if you like, a Conservative family.
To touch on the point that I'd previously made of, I don't think it should be so easy to change big opposite parties, the two major parties in the UK, is also because it forces people into camps which actually aren't necessarily all that different. Whereas in a healthy democracy, you should be able to have parties that represent your views as a whole, rather than just a case of who do we think is going to get pip the post, who's going to get the most votes. So it's so much tactical.
And just looking at the SNP in particular, Kate Forbes, I'm assuming that you don't share the same values and politics, apart from the main issue of independence. To a woman. Right. So what happens? What happens there? Is the SNP now too broad a church, with Kate Forbes as Deputy First Minister? This
has always been the difficulty with the SNP, is that probably the only thing that unites everyone in it is a desire to see an independent Scotland.
And the minute you get that, the party splits?
I imagine so. I've always said the day one of an independent Scotland, my vote's up for grabs, because that's the way it should be. In my view, the SNP would have served its purpose, and it would allow new parties with genuine diversity to actually have the freedom to grow and flourish.
But if the SNP moves too far in one direction under Swinney and Kate Forbes, would you consider defecting? And who would you
depends
defect to?
how far. Well, this is, again, I don't think I would ever defect to another party, because I think if you defect to another party, you should have a by-election, because you're essentially moving into an entirely different platform of policies than the ones that you were elected to enact. So at the most, I would, if the party ended up not representing me, then I would leave the party, but I wouldn't necessarily defect to somewhere else.
Not tempted by the Greens?
No, because I was elected on an SNP platform. And I also think that John Swinney, knowing him and having worked with him, I do think he's the best person right now to sort of guide through this rough patch.
Justine, just as a member, former member of Parliament, just talk us through the process, the kind of bonds of belonging to a political party. And if you decide, for various reasons, whether they're tactical or strategic or because of values trampled on, to leave, how painful is that? Is it like, and for you, I guess, the party left you rather than you leaving the party, and they moved in another direction. Tell us about the emotional impact of that.
And I'm still a member of the Conservative Party. I think it's difficult. And I actually respected the fact that at that time, the Conservative Party was heading off in a different direction. So in a sense, that's politics, and no one's bigger than the party. It is all about people, but ultimately it was heading off in a direction. But also, you don't have to be, you're a sentient being. You make your own decisions. So if you don't want to go in that direction, no one's forcing you. And I think everybody makes their own choices, actually, about when enough is enough.
I just want to get back to the personal aspect of this. As you said, the party, it is a party political system. The parties are all powerful in Westminster. You work within that party framework. You have bonds there. This is your family. So to leave that family and defect, and I'm imagining, perhaps I'm being unfair to Natalie Elphicke, that she maybe didn't have the same qualms that some other people would have, but to leave that family after so many years must be incredibly difficult.
I think it must be really tough. And so for me, I was in a different situation because I had a lot of my friends obviously still in the party. I had a lot of friends across Parliament, actually. And so I still see those people. But I think if you're making a political decision, in a sense, to not just almost go off in a different direction for yourself, but actively join the opposition.
Also,
I think that's
what's
very
going to happen to you in the tea room or in the pub down the road? I mean, you'll be
I've watched them. They can be very lonely existences.
Yes.
Quentin Davis went across from the Tories to Labour. He was given a ministerial job in defence. I remember watching him wandering around a Labour Party conference alone.
Like an outer moon.
Friendless.
Gary, don't defect from Channel 4. Don't do it. You won't be welcome back into our wonderful canteen here, the non-existent one.
See, so I don't have many friends in Parliament, and you will understand why when I make this point. Actually, when I think about, in recent memory, all the defectors, the only person I think has defected purely on a matter of principle is Lee Anderson. He's the one who defected to a party that actually better represented his views and was in line with awful views, horrific views, but at least they chimed with him. Whereas I think
just to remind everyone, he moved from the Conservatives to Reform. Yeah.
But I think and just in my own experience, there's often, don't get me wrong, there probably is a bit of principle in it, but there's also very cute politics at play, and what will grab headlines, what will do the most damage to the people I'm angry at, and things like that. So that it's not always a very pure motivation.
And just explain to us also, so you leave the party, you defect to another party. What happens at the next election then, Gary?
So in the case of Natalie Elphicke, she said she's not going to run for the Labour Party. She's said she hasn't been...
Massive sigh of relief.
Hasn't been offered a peerage. I don't know if that means she's been given one. But it was a very careful choice of word, but it doesn't look like she's getting a peerage. There's a suggestion that she's going to work on housing policy in some way for Labour, which has made people think, is she going to get a quango or a position on a quango or something like that in the future? Nobody's quite sure. Everybody's still scratching their heads and wondering whether Keir Starmer hasn't necessarily made a mistake.
And have there been examples in the past where someone's defected to another party and then got re-elected for that other party in the same seat? Or?
So that's what Christian Wakeford is hoping to do. The Bury MP, who went across, is now a Labour whip. That has gone...
Has he got a chance? Yes, presumably.
I think most pollsters would say, looking at recent local elections, he's joined the winning side. But in the case of Natalie Elphicke, it was never really a runner, I think. Most of the Labour activists in Dover, they've been running against an Elphicke of one forename or another for a generation, and because her husband was the MP there before as a Conservative MP. So that just
also she's been rather rude about Keir Starmer in the past, hasn't she? So for them to go on the doorstep,
not that long. I mean, like yesterday,
the
day before,
yesterday, exactly. Yeah. So do you think? I mean, again, defections happen in political systems all over the world, but is there a problem here with the way we elect our parliaments? Should we have a different system where you don't get, one party morphing into something it wasn't because they're worried about pressures from the outside? Tories and UKIP, for instance.
When you look at, if you like, at the need for a more diverse parliament and to what extent, if you like, these political parties, particularly Labour and Conservatives, they were forged 100 years ago in the case of Labour. In a sense, they were drawn around political battle lines that were really important. But in a sense, those battle lines are quite different in a way for Britain now.
Absolutely different.
And so you've got these original parties almost stuck, like bits of furniture that almost need to be updated, and they're trying to find ways to update them themselves, but actually, can they do it?
There's also, I think, an argument to be made as well about, if you take a step back and look at politics more broadly, is that I think the UK's started to go down the same path as America, in the sense that realistically, you won't be Prime Minister unless you have big business, millionaires, billionaires behind you, whereas it should be people that decide what the government is. And we've ended up in a system where, as I say, the two main parties don't appear to be that radically different.
On this podcast, we also discuss what the politicians are not saying. And what they're not saying is who might be next on the defection list. Gary, is there anyone that you can think of?
Well, I think all bets are off after Natalie Elphicke, aren't they?
Do you know any names?
I don't. There's speculation around some Tory MPs, but they were more predictable ones who would be in the soft One Nation, more familiar ground for Tory defections to Labour. But there is strong talk that there is more than one in the behind the curtains, ready to emerge, and you get an impression that maybe every single week Keir Starmer's going to be sitting there, and there's this mystery gap behind him. But two is talked about. And
Justine, are you hearing any other names on your WhatsApp groups?
I think
in the grapevine?
I think there'll probably be a group of Conservative MPs who announced they're standing down.
Nadeem Zahawi today.
Nadeem Zahawi's
the defection to private life. There's a lot of that going on.
So maybe more defections to private life.
The other defection that we haven't talked about yet, which is arguably more important, is the defection of voters at the next election.
Yes.
After last week's disastrous results, Gary, let's start with you.
You look at those results and you have to revisit a phrase we all used after 2019, which was a realignment of British politics. We were all talking about then, and Boris Johnson broadened the Tory coalition. Actually, you have to admit it was more of a de-alignment, and people are moving around quite a lot, and they're very available to other parties. But people are moving around with their votes more than has happened in the 20th century.
People are fickle now, aren't they?
Yeah, you look at the last 3 elections, and I think it was about 50% of people will have voted for a different party in that period. And let's put to one side where all the focus was on Labour's success in quite a lot of seats. Interestingly, though, one of the other phenomena about de-alignment is that people are willing to vote for a party that isn't one of the two main parties. And we saw that happening quite a bit. And the great presumption is that that won't happen anything like this in a general election. Well, almost certainly not. But it might happen more than it has done in the past. And what a lot of Labour MPs say to you, looking at where those votes built up in areas with high Muslim populations, or maybe sort of slightly more metropolitan, lefty leaning inner cities, maybe going to the Greens. That's maybe where Labour should have an eye, if they get into power, where dissent will travel and where their own vote will leak too. And so quite a lot of Labour MPs saying the flashing indicators out of those local elections for them, and obviously they were good results on many levels, are stored up problems for a Labour government. How quickly do they hemorrhage support and where to?
Absolutely.
Justine, there was so much speculation last week that if the results were really bad, and they were pretty terrible for Rishi Sunak, that there would be more talk of, daggers in the back, another leadership contest. That seems to have gone for now. And I wonder if that's because, tick the right box, either a sense of belated solidarity around the one leader they've got, and to change that would be madness, or just, frankly, resignation for the almost inevitable defeat.
I think it's, in a sense, it's something else. I think that reform-like group of Conservative MPs that have really led the party down its political cul-de-sac don't want to own the electoral results of that strategy. And so, although they've said Rishi Sunak needs to own it, and of course
So it's cowardice.
Well, they just want him to carry the can, and he's done his best to adopt that strategy. It's never quite enough. They want him to go further and go further right. But I think essentially they've realised it's going to end in defeat, and therefore they don't want to feel like it's to do with them, when actually it's everything to do with the direction they've pressed the party to go in recent years.
Why do you think he wants to cling on to the bitter end? Is it to get to the 2-year mark? Is it pride? Is it hoping for divine intervention? I mean, part of me would think, just to hell with it. All these restive voices in the party, just go for an election now. Call a snap election.
I think, in a sense, maybe every day when you're getting up, maybe if you've got some hope that maybe it'll just get better.
It's better getting up in number 10 than in number 34.
That's life. That's better life than the day after you've called an election, when actually it's possibly the beginning of the end.
It feels like the Conservative strategy is to hang on as long as they can in the hope that Labour do something to mess up. And in the local election results, which was a resounding success for Labour, but it was interesting that there were pockets across the country that you would expect Labour to be dominant in, where suddenly the voters were falling away. And the first thing that you hear when you talk to your average voter is, I'm not interested in politics, they're all the same. And events like yesterday crossing the House.
But you didn't have local elections in Scotland, but the polls are quite alarming, aren't they, for the SNP? Are you worried about voter defections from the SNP?
I mean, always, I think every political party should be. And the issue that the SNP have got at the minute is this old myth of vote Labour to keep out the Tories, because, as we know, Scotland hasn't voted Conservative in over 70 years, and yet we've had Conservative governments for the vast majority of that time. So the issue is, for the SNP certainly, is we have to be seen to be talking about the things that are mattering to people, and also showing what the value for your vote is.
Justine, I think, is absolutely on the money, talking about how the rebels in the Tory party have decided they want Rishi Sunak to own a defeat, and they haven't got the numbers anyway to bring him down. If the SNP doesn't do well, who's damaged? Who owns that?
That's, I honestly don't know, because one of the things that is actually fairly good about the SNP on the whole is that there is that element of unity for purpose.
Yeah.
The cracks have shown shown a lot, yes.
And is it Kate Forbes' defeat? Is it John Swinney? Is it continuity Nicola Sturgeon's fall?
Well, I think a lot of this is going to come down to what direction John Swinney takes, because I do think he's got an opportunity now to almost reconnect with
So what
voters.
will it look like? Continuity Nicola Sturgeon, or something more like Kate Forbes?
I think John's his own man. He'll do what he thinks is best, and what people are actually wanting to talk about, which is cost of living, it's your energy bills, it's poverty, essentially.
As usual, we like to end this podcast with a long-range forecast. So in just a minute, if you can, is this defection a storm in a teacup or winds of change? Gary?
I think it's closer to storm in a teacup. I don't think we've had the full storm. I just think Natalie Elphicke is a slightly sort of unexploded device. And I wouldn't rule out that there's a bit more embarrassment to come.
Right. She could also be just a pub quiz question in the future, couldn't she?
As most defectors end up being.
Right. What do you think? Mhairi, long-term forecast.
It could be the start of a change, I think, because right now it's not clear how much that defection will cause Labour grief or to what extent it will cause
That's
Labour
the more
grief.
interesting side of the story, isn't it?
I think so. Because
the Tories are bleeding out support.
And it kind of also goes back to what I was saying about the Conservative strategy seeming to be hoping that Labour will mess up, because if Labour have made a miscalculation and make further ones down the line, then that could make the election
could be some
a
real
bit more
embarrassment there.
unpredictable than it seems.
Justine?
I think for Rishi Sunak, it's another moment of damage. And I think for Labour, it's a moment when they are discovering that if you want to be in government, there's tough choices. And some of them that get made, you're not always going to like. But that's that.
Thank you very much to all of you. That's it for the Political Forecast. Goodbye. See you soon.